Welcome to Jetchro Cast, everybody. Season 2 is beginning, and who knows where Season 2 will take us, but I know where Episode 1 of Season 2 is going to take us is right here, and I'm going to tell you my story of leaving the Mormon Church. I never wanted to make a public statement on this. It's not my deal to do things publicly unless I feel like it. The time is now. For many, many reasons, the time is now. I'm going to tell you my story, and I don't know how it's going to go. I'm just going to get it all out there and see how it goes. But just know that no matter what I say, I am coming in good faith. I don't have an agenda. Not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just telling you my story because of those of you who know me or are around me may want to know. And maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not. But to me, this is my record. My family can hear it. My grandkids can hear it. My friends can hear it. Everybody can hear it. This is my story. This is only my story. This isn't Rochelle's story. This isn't anybody else's story. This is just my story. There may be times when I mention other people or talk a little bit about Rochelle, but she can tell her own story in how we came to be where we are today. The date today is August 26, 2024. And it's a beautiful day. Well, start obviously where you start in the beginning with my upbringing. I was born into the Mormon Church. My heritage is from the Mormon Church. On both sides of my family, my mom's side, the families came mostly from England through Australia and settled in Paragon, Utah in 1860. My father's side, I'm not quite sure. They definitely came to the Americas earlier than my mother's side, but most definitely pioneer stock. I am the product myself of a polygamous relationship between my great-great-great-grandpa and his second wife, who he married when he was older and she was 16. She died when she was 36 years old. That's the product that I am of, and I'm proud of it. It is my heritage, and it is the way it is. I would say my mom is the one who drove the religion more than my father, and that's not a slight on her. She's a fervent believer in the Mormon Church and wanted us children to live its tenets. To that end, we had a fairly strict upbringing in the religion, although I think my mom's a fun-loving person. There were times when it was very strict. We would go to church every Sunday, obviously. We would obey the Sabbath day, which would mean that we would go to church, and then when we come home, we would most of the time be required to stay in our church clothes all day. There was no TV watching on Sundays. We had a pool. You weren't allowed to go in the pool. Sunday was a time to reflect. Sunday was a time to read the scriptures or take a nap or just take a rest from what we would call earthly labors, just like in the creation of the world in the book of Genesis. So that was our paradigm. And Sunday was Sunday, and it wasn't like any other day. Matter of fact, we would sing a song that say, Saturday is a special day. It's the day we get ready for Sunday. So Saturday was cleaning the house, getting the groceries. So on Sunday we could relax, go to church, focus, and rest. And that was the paradigm. That was the paradigm most of the time growing up. I remember watching the Super Bowl. There was Super Bowl Sunday when I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And I wanted to watch it. I was a football fan. And it was a big, big deal that I just chose to watch it. I had to watch it alone. I made the choice. And it was not easy. I felt very guilty for watching it, but I did. Our routine in the family was very regimented. We would get up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning to do scripture study. We would all get downstairs on the couch and we'd each read a couple verses each. And we'd read at least a chapter. It was cold. I remember there was cold. We'd have to make the fire. We had kerosene heaters. And we would study. It was a real deal. I remember one time we were doing it, and one of our cats peed on one of the blankets that we were using to keep us warm, and it was a major scandal that the cat peed. But we would get up and do that, and then as I got older into my teen years, we would do early morning seminary. So it was basically like doing church, home study church, because we didn't live really near any church. My dad worked early, so we would get up at 4:30 and do seminary, and we would study through a study guide he would teach us. It was primarily in those days me and my older sister, and more than once we would fall asleep while he was talking, before it was our turn to talk or whatever. We'd have to wake someone up, but we were in it, so it was immersive. It was permeated. The religion permeated everything we did. It permeated our social group. We lived in upstate New York where there's not a lot of members, and because of that, the members that we did had, they were our peer. My friends were all from that group, my youth groups. We all went to different high schools, but we would do Sunday church and then Wednesday activities and hang out otherwise, do church dances. Social group, support group, family. Those people were close. We loved them. We were very close and tight with them. If anything went down, we had each other's back. Now, there was a fair share of drama in amongst that, as you could expect. But we were in, man. The church was everything. And from that peer group is actually where I found my wife, Rochelle, because we grew up together. Her family lived there. They had Utah roots. They ended up in New York. And the church was everything for us. And the geographic area in which we lived was upstate New York, which, as you know, our stake was the Palmyra stake. And so it was the foundation in the beginning of the religion was paramount in my mind. Like we would go to the Hill Cumorah all the time. I spent untold hours in the Sacred Grove, untold hours touring the Joseph Smith home where he was when he grew up. Visitor centers, especially the Hill Cumorah Visitor Center, had movies we would go watch. I would walk on top of the Hill Cumorah. It was very, very prominent in my mind, the foundation of the religion. And so much so that I would say Joseph Smith was definitely a hero of mine. Like, he was my hero. I identified more with him than I would of Jesus because I saw where he grew up. I understood the geography of where he was. When he said he went here, I was there. It was very real to me. And then as time went on, my parents would take us to church history sites. We would go to Kirtland, Ohio, and see the temple and the store. And then we would go to Nauvoo and walk all over Nauvoo and see where the temple was, where there's a temple now. But back then there wasn't. We would see the brick. We'd make the bricks. We'd see where Joseph Smith lived. And it became very visceral in my mind where the religion started, where it went to Ohio, where it went to Nauvoo. I don't remember going to Missouri, but I knew I had an idea. And then we went to Carthage, where Joseph Smith was in prison and ultimately shot. I saw the bloodstains on the floor. This was a real thing for me. This guy was a real being for me. We would also watch the movies, which portrayed his life and the first vision and then the troubles he went through. I remember there was a movie. I remember being in a movie theater, and I don't even know if this movie, I think it exists, but I remember being in a movie theater about the Mormons. And I'm calling this up from memory, but I remember there being a tar and feather scene, and I remember there being is it called Hans Mill, where the bad guy Missouri's shot and murdered some Mormons. And I remember there being a scene where a guy shoots a little kid and the scene goes black. I don't know if that's true. I have to fact check, but so these things were in my mind always.
Joseph Smith, the prophet. Look at the prophet now. Look at him. Come on, let's go. That'll teach him.
It was very, very real. And then to bring it even more real, there was the Hill Cumorah pageant, which was a pageant that was put on the Hill Cumorah. And it was a wonderful, awesome theatrical display of the beginnings of the church and the Book of Mormon. And then the ending scene is the destruction just after the death of Christ in the Americas, because the Book of Mormon says when he died in Jerusalem, he also came to the Americas to visit. But before that, there were earthquakes and destructions. And at the end, Jesus comes out on a zip line that you don't see the zip line. It looks like he's floating in air. That was an effect that was added later. That wasn't initially in it, but then when they added that, it literally looks like Jesus is there, and it really freaks you out. But it's inspiring. There's lines from the Hill Cumorah pageant that, to this day, I could quote to you. I was in it. I fought in the battle scenes. I would lose every time because I was a Lamanite. It was no good. It was crazy. And one of the scenes in the Book of Mormon, and that is depicted in the Hill Cumorah pageant, is the conversion of Alma, and then his conversion of others in the waters of Mormon, where he asks people if they'll commit to living a life that is dedicated to Christ and his principles.
That is the desire of our hearts. Yea, we shall make the covenant.
I desire to be baptized.
Yes. Baptize me, Alma.
And by doing so, they would get baptized. And those were the waters of Mormon, right? It's in the Book of Mormon. It's in the Hill Cumorah pageant. And then later when I went to Guatemala on my mission, and I will talk about it, there's a lake there called Lake Atitlan, and that is rumored to be the geographical spot where actually the waters of Mormon. So as you can see, these things, I was always trying to take what was on paper and what was a feeling and make it identify with identifiable things. And I think ultimately that would lead to, down the road, further issues and questions. But even as I'm talking about it right now, like, I think of those days, and those are great days. Like, I don't have any bad feelings. I don't have regrets or resentments. It's like I can remember feeling that way as a way, you can probably see it in my eyes. Like, I feel like that was a way of hope. You had a belief in something that was concrete. Like, and I always felt like I was just trying to discover more. Like, I want to know more about Joseph Smith and more about the religion. Where were they? Geography. What was going on? Like, I was just trying to make it more real for myself as opposed to just reading words on a page. Like, once your mind goes from that to another thing, right, you want to learn more. How was I as growing up as far as obeying? I was very obedient. I was, despite listening to the rap music, which I could somehow make that okay, I was in. Like, I didn't drink. I think one time I tried smoking, but obviously who's going to like that? That was when I was young, probably 12 or 13. My cousin had a pack. We tried it. It was gross, blah. I didn't, I had obviously teenage hormonal things, right? Everything can get you excited, but there was no internet back then. There was no way to really find content that if you weren't really looking for it, it wouldn't be just there for you easy. I remember one time going to one of my very few non-Mormon friends' house for a minute, and of course, because I went there and let my guard down, he pulls out his dad's Playboy magazine. So I looked at that. I felt awful about it. But for the most part, I was a good boy. I had only one non-Mormon girlfriend. And of course, that led to an interaction with her that I later had to feel guilty about because, we kissed a little and we touched a little bit. And that was like very, very bad that I would do that.
Please never lay on each other or wrestle on the floor together. If you have failed and you've kept it a secret all this time, whether you were 12 years old or last night at 17, that you can now have a way to take that sin, that sexual sin, to your ecclesiastical authority. And who is that man? Your bishop. Make the proper confession in the light of truth. Yes, it can be tough. But that doesn't matter. The sin is far more serious than the embarrassment for a moment before a bishop who knows and understands and loves you, and in his heart is saying, oh, thank God that I have a boy in my ward, a girl in my ward that understands the principle of repentance.
And I was guilty about it for a year till I finally went to my bishop and told him, and I felt, because he's like, don't worry about it. I was like, okay, then God loves me now. He didn't for that whole year because I honked some Hooters, right, with the freak. Yeah, whatever. And it's crazy. I've always felt bad about the way I treated that person because I just realized that she wasn't Mormon and I just couldn't be around her anymore. Just ghosted, right? Not cool. So I think it's fair to say by the time I was 18 years old and of adult age, I was all in. My paradigm was a believer. I didn't have doubts. I was convinced I was going to be a stupendous missionary. I was ready to go, even though I was falling in love with who would be my wife, and it was sad to leave her. I wanted to go. That's a rite of passage in the Mormon Church. I was ready for the next step. I was terribly homesick, and I am always by nature that way, but I didn't care. Nothing was going to stop me from going. So I get my call to go on a mission. I open it up, and it says, I read it, Guatemala, Quetzaltenango. It's actually Quetzaltenango, but I remember saying Quetzaltenango. And I was like, oh, sweet, man. And there's no internet back then, so I couldn't really research what it was like. Or the history of it. If I would have learned the CIA was always all over it, and had a checkered history. It was in the middle of a civil war, things that they don't tell you, right? Away I went. But I was all the way in, convinced that I was in, convinced that I had a major future with the church. My patriarchal blessing was which is a blessing you get from kind of a shaman of the church who gives you you record the blessing, it gets written in paper, and it is a blessing that tells you about what he sees for your future. And mine said I was going to go on a mission and work with my mission president, and it was going to be a whole thing. I was going to have unique experiences, which actually turned out to be true. But I was just convinced that I would sit in council with many. So I just convinced that maybe I was going to be a bishop, or maybe who even knows, like maybe be a general authority. Like I was in, and I wasn't ambitious for that. It wasn't like I wanted it, but I was just preparing myself for the Lord to call me to that calling, because I knew it was probably going to be coming. So to say I was a believer, to say I had testimony, I had feeling, I had affirmations, even now as I talk about it, I get kind of tingly, because you associate, you're told that when you feel a certain way, it means it's a confirmation of something. And so I would feel it. I feel conviction in my action and my thoughts. I was all the way in. So now here I am on my own. I'm a missionary in Guatemala. I come in with a full belief that my mission president is going to guide us. He's inspired from God. We're going to have these unique experiences. I was envisioning baptizing so many people and getting pictures of people lined up to be baptized. I was all the way in. And I think my first chink in the armor actually in my belief system was my mission president, because I was convinced that he was going to be, the best thing ever. And like he was going to be inspired. And really, I think that he was all cattle, no hat. Wait, no, the other way around. All hat, no cattle. He spoke it, and he spoke it, and he tried to be inspired, but the words just didn't resonate. And I just started thinking, man, this guy, does he know what he's doing? Like, freak. And his wife was grouchy with us, didn't want to be around us. And after a while, I just started thinking, I think this guy's just here for 3 years. He was from Mexico, and he's just living high on the hog. He drove a nice car and beautiful house. Apparently, he was notorious for eating at really nice restaurants, nice steakhouses, getting good meals. And so it was just, it bothered me. It bothered me that he didn't seem to know all the missionaries. He would read my name badge for the first while, like he didn't know me. I'm like, how is he going to get inspiration about me if he doesn't even know who I am? I started noticing little inconsistencies in the doctrine, like why are we being encouraged to baptize these young kids? Like it was just like, get the numbers, it wasn't like you did it without conscience, but anybody who could spit back what you taught to them in an interview was approved for baptism, regardless of age. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to baptize this 10, 12, 13-year-old kid, and he's not going to have the same upbringing in the church that I did. He's not going to be, how's he going to have a support system? And I was in areas where I was in very few areas where there was a physical building. Like the congregation average of the areas I was in was 20 to 30. I'm like, there's no young men's program. There's no way to support this kid, but I'm going to baptize him. And I remember talking to my mom about it in letter, and she's like, look, she told me the predominant thought, which is, she's not wrong. It's the doctrine, which was, it's better that they get the covenant of baptism than not. So if they get it and then they fall away, the Lord will understand. And I remember thinking, okay, fine, but why would they need the covenant then if the Lord just understands and knows their heart anyway? That doesn't make any sense. There's no tiene sentido is what I'm thinking in Spanish. But I went with it, and I was very careful. I was very conservative in who I would teach and baptize, and I think that probably cost me numbers, and it probably cost me some leadership positions. But I wanted to try and baptize people who I thought would have a support in some way, family members, or if they couldn't have the church, family members. I mean, we had a couple younger, unsupported people, but everybody I baptized, I felt like at least I had, in good faith, had taught them the religion. They had a general understanding of what was going on. Now, I spoke earlier about the waters of Mormon. In Guatemala, there's the lake Atitlan, which is kind of a volcano-covered, beautiful lake. And those were thought to be the waters of Mormon. And that was wondrous for me. My first day, I landed in Guatemala City, and we have to drive through Lake Atitlan, which was not in our mission. We had to drive through there to get to our mission. And I remember seeing it and feeling inspired, like, oh man, these are the people. These are the people of the Book of Mormon. I'm going to go be able to teach them their own history through this book. And they're going to buy in and understand, wow, this finally makes sense. Jesus loved me enough to come to my continent, to my people to visit after he was in Jerusalem. This is amazing. And it would like just gave me such animo in Spanish. Like it gave me a lot of excitement to go share this message. And I was just sure everybody was going to be, the way I was going to present it, everybody was going to accept it. It was going to be great. So I get my first mission companion, and they sort us out. And first thing I noticed was when we pulled up, the missionaries that were there were like, they look haggard, like hiking boots and like khakis and like dirty white shirts and like barely ties and a little bit longer hair. And I was like, this looked like special forces missionaries. And that's kind of what it turned out to be, was a special forces mission, because it was like camping for 2 years. But I found my companion and I said, hi, hi, elder. Are you elder so-and-so? I'm elder. I'm with you. And he's like, looks at me and he goes, looks me up and down. And he goes, I'm wearing a brand new suit. He looks me up and down. And he goes, well, Slick, welcome to hell. And he wasn't wrong. So the chinks in the armor start, the baptism of little kids, the numbers driven stuff, the mission president not being quite as inspired as I thought. And then it kind of got worse. It wasn't like a point of like falling away, but I didn't like it. I noticed that the disobedient missionaries would be called to leadership positions. And if you haven't been on a mission, you don't understand. Like the leader, you're in a mini society where they control. They take your passport. You're controlled. They give you money. They tell you where to live. Like this is your life. And your leaders, who are your peers, just other missionaries other than the mission president, they become like your mom and your dad, and they become your boss. And so who got called to leadership mattered. And I would see these guys who were just chalking kids. We call it chalking when you would just baptize people who weren't converted. They'd baptize a lot, and they would disobedient, out with girls. Not a lot of drinking, but girls, or traveling around, or just doing the things that you weren't supposed to do. And I wasn't like super strict. Like I didn't wake up on time every day, or I wasn't perfect in that regard, but I would never be with a girl. I would never do anything like bad, right? But these guys would, and then they're in leadership positions, and I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to square that in my mind. Or then there were the ones who were so obedient that got put in leadership positions. They weren't even likable, relatable people. They were judgy and pompous, and I just didn't like it. And I'm always anti-authority anyway, and I didn't care for that. I didn't buy into that, and I wouldn't kiss the ring. I wouldn't bend the knee with these people. And I just was there to do what I wanted to, what I needed to do, what I thought the Lord wanted me to do. And because of that, I think we had some cool experiences. But I noticed the little things. We would set goals to baptize 20 families a month. And I'd be like, oh, we can't baptize 20 families a month. We don't baptize one family a month. Elder, with enough faith, we can get it done. You can do it. And then we would fall short, and they would tell us, that's because, Elder, you guys aren't living righteously enough, or it was always our fault. You don't have enough faith. You're not working hard enough. And that's not good on the mental health of a kid. 19-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid who's already away, struggling in another culture, trying to learn a language, homesick, all the factors. It left an impression on me that I was thinking, damn, I don't know about this. But I pushed on. I got through the 2 years. So I pushed on. I got through the 2 years and I made it home. But one last story about Guatemala. Towards the end of my mission, I'm walking through the city of Quetzaltenango, Shela, and this middle-aged North American guy comes, and gringo guy. And we always liked talking to him. And there were some Peace Corps guys there, but I just liked speaking English. I almost felt like I was home for a minute. So, hey, how are you? And he just lit into us. You know, this culture has been raped and pillaged by colonialism for the last 500 years. And we continue to do it. And here you are down here bringing your American religion, asking them to pay 10% of their income. And you're doing the same thing. And what are you guys doing? You know, this makes me sick. I don't understand. We don't respect their culture. We don't respect their own lives. We just bring our own. We try to bring everything down there, including religion. And he went in, and I remember thinking for a second, like getting really angry. I think it was because I kind of agreed with him, but then I realized he was just an angry non-believer with Satan in his heart. So it wasn't going to be good for him. But it did. To this day, I remember that, and I was like, man, first of all, courage for him to say that. And he's damn right, by the way. He's absolutely right. So I make it home. And what I would take from my mission was, at that point, I was firmly entrenched in the belief system. I did have some context to it. I was maturing in my faith and my beliefs. I was breaking away from the programming, meaning the standard belief system. And I think any true Mormon to this day, whether they tell themselves or not, there's things about the doctrine or the beliefs that they don't necessarily agree with, but they think they just find a way in their mind why it's okay. Like, just don't believe. Have you ever been to a Mormon funeral? No matter how that person died, they could be a murderer. They could overdose on drugs, whatever kind of life. They could have been a bad person throughout their life. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine. In Mormon funerals, everybody's going to make it to heaven some way or the other because God understands. And that is completely against, and it goes against what the doctrine is of the church.
From her sudden departure, we can learn a very important lesson. Now is the time to prepare to meet God. Tomorrow may be too late. Prophets through the ages have so declared. This life is the time for men to prepare to meet God. Do not procrastinate the day of your repentance. Yet many do procrastinate. A prophet warns us, ye cannot say that I will repent, that I will return to my God. Nay, ye cannot say this.
So that's my point. Every Mormon person, even if they're practicing fully, has some parts that they have their own version of the belief in such a certain doctrine. They don't believe it all the way fully. So I was there, but I was all the way in when I came home. I had, obviously, one thing that stuck with me was it was presented to me prior to a mission that the mission would be the best 2 years of my life. And I can sincerely say it was not. I don't regret 1 second of being there. Learning Spanish has changed my life and shaped the course of my life in many ways. But I can't say it was the best 2 years. And I think it's not fair to represent that to kids. And that has kind of gone away. But there was a time when that was spouted as that. And it made me distrust a little bit in the company line, right? So, but I was home. I was dedicated to being a good member of the church. There was a time right when I got home when I felt a major letdown. And for the first little bit, I didn't really want to go to church. And I think I was just having burnout from the whole situation. But I was definitely in, like, I was going to go. I was going to get married in the temple. I was going to live a life in the Mormon church with my family and everything else. And that's basically what I did. That's where a course of events landed me. So in my mid-20s, my search to bring the faith together with concrete evidence or arguments, it led me to a website by a man named jefflindsay.com. Jeff Lindsay is his name, JEFFLINDSAY. And I think he still has the domain by that name. And I just happened upon it because I was curious always how geographically the Book of Mormon fit in with real world geography. And then I read his website. And his website, he was an apologetic, which is a person who defends the faith. And I started perusing through his website, and I was just curious about Book of Mormon geography and where he thought the events of the Book of Mormon happened, because there's theories that happen in North America, there's theories that happen in Central America, even though the Book of Mormon says it happened in upstate New York. Somehow the events actually happened in Central America, even though the plates were buried in Hilcomore. So none of that that was another one's like, well, where did it happen? And if it happened here in upstate New York where I'm living, why aren't there ruins? Why is there no evidence of it, right? Well, that's because it's in the Lord hid it, or if the answers were there, it'd be too easy. If the evidences were too strong, then everybody would believe it. Like, you have to test your faith. But on his website, he would raise issues, and then he would respond to the issues. And he raised issues I did not know existed at the time. And that was the beginning of me going, okay, there's issues here, right? I wrote down a couple of them. One was, did Joseph Smith borrow ideas for the Book of Mormon? Why are there snippets of Shakespeare in the Book of Mormon? Why is there 18th century Methodist theology themes in the Book of Mormon? Why is there limited physical evidence of these historical events? Why does the Book of Mormon mention horses when there were really no horses during that time in anywhere in the Americas? Why does the Book of Abraham, as written, that was supposedly translated by Joseph Smith off some papyrus that he acquired, why, when in the later years when they actually translated the papyrus, scholars did, it was a funeral text? It had nothing to do with what the Book of Abraham said. And I didn't know any of this. And so I'm going, oh, okay, well, there's these issues that I didn't know existed, but Jeff Lindsay has great answers for them, which is great. So as I worked through the issues, as I read through, I was like, okay, this is awesome. I know more about the faith because I know that there's issues, but now I know the answers. So it didn't cause me pause. It made me feel even more entrenched and knowledgeable about the faith. And that way I could help other people. I never really wanted to get into apologetics myself. I didn't like because they would go back and forth, the non-believers and the believers. But I would like to see the issues and then find the answers. Not a lot of them gave me pause. The one that gave me pause was my hero, Joseph Smith. I found out that he was also a polygamist. I knew Brigham Young was a polygamist. I didn't know Joseph Smith had over 30 wives. I didn't know. And upon learning that, that was probably the biggest chink in my armor to that point. I was like, okay, this guy who all the shows I watched portrayed him as a loving husband to Emma, never talked about the other wives. Why aren't they? And what is going on? What else aren't they telling me? And that was kind of like, okay. But you carry on, you go to church, you're in your callings, you're trying to be a good believer. So you just keep going. You're at that point raising a small family. And so I'm going along, and daily I would listen to church talks. Daily I would study, not always the scriptures, but I would study some church theme. I would always have something in my MP3 player. Back then it was MP3 players. That was a church talk. I was a student of, an admirer, and basically like a disciple of Neil Maxwell, Henry Eyring, and Jeffrey Holland. Like those guys, like I never liked Nelson and Oakes, by the way. I can't believe these guys are running the church now. They're not dynamic. But the other three, man, inspiring writers, inspiring orators. I would get emotional, I would tear up, I would drive in a car. Like I was a firm believer. It was moving to me to listen to them. It was inspiring to me to listen to them. And so this time, I'm developing my faith side as well. I'm not just looking for physical evidences. To say that I was not a studier of the religion, or I was not a believer and that I was not fully converted, is absolutely wrong. Unlike most people who I've met who have no longer in the church, I think I was more a firm believer than most of them. And that's not to say I was awesome. I'm just saying I was in, but not to the point. It was weird because the way I lived, I still would be like, I would not be like judgy, or I would not feel pious. I try to be very careful not to do that way. I was pretty laid back about things. Didn't always do family home in the evening. Didn't do scripture study, or didn't really pray with Rochelle. So it wasn't all the way in, but it was more of an intellectual pursuit, a very personal, selfish pursuit. It wasn't something that even I felt like I should push on others, even my own wife or kids. It's weird that way. I don't know psychologically why, but that's just the way it was. I would say the biggest turning point happened, the biggest event in my faith journey happened when the book Rough Stone Rolling came out. And I think it was right when I was just going to law school. So 2004 to 2007, I think it came out, I want to say early on. So maybe 04 or 05. And that was a book written by Richard Bushman, who at that time was an LDS patriarch, and which is a high standing official in the church, not a like a governing authority, but like almost like a wise, like I said, a shaman, the guy you go to bless you. And he has the direct line to speak to God for you and give you blessings. And he was also a Harvard professor, very well known in the church, well respected. And his book was, before getting his book, the intro to the book says before he wrote the book, he went and met with apostles, and he was given a blessing by Jeffrey Holland, who was an apostle. So this book comes out, and not ironically, whatever the word is, I bought the hard copy of the book in Palmyra, New York, in the bookstore, the church LDS bookstore in Palmyra, New York. That's where I bought the book. So I delve into that book, and it blew my mind. So many things I didn't know. It was like reading Jeff Lindsay's website, but times a million. Like, to learn in that book that during the time of Joseph Smith, everybody was having visions of Christ. He wasn't having a monopoly on that. It was a fervored, geographically and spiritually and religiously in that time. People felt that they would have visions. It was not uncommon for people to say they saw Jesus. And that blew my mind, because I always thought that Joseph Smith was unique in that regard in saying that. And I would say he wasn't. There was numerous accounts of people claiming they had visions. Another thing that the book talks about is that when Joseph Smith's first vision happened, the company line, the church's line was, he went to go pray to see what church he should join, because there were so many different churches. In reality, his own writings say that he went to go seek forgiveness of his sins. That's why he went to go pray. The story changed over time, as did his account of what happened during that vision. And that bothered me, that there were multiple visions, multiple versions of the vision. The first time he went, just an angel visited him. And then the second time, I don't have these memorized, but the second time, suddenly there's Jesus and an angel. And the third time is Jesus and his Father. And they told him, and every time he would tell the story is a little bit different, a lot different actually. And what they told him became more grandiose. and as Joseph Smith told the story over the years. There's some in his own handwriting, some in as he related to others. He's told multiple versions over several years, but they were not consistent, not even materially consistent, other than the fact that he was getting a vision and he was praying. And that started to bother me. I was like, okay, wait a minute. If you have this grand event, like if I think of the birth of one of my children, I could tell you the event now and I could tell you in 5 years, and it would not materially change. And I know there's counter arguments to that, but the point is he was not consistent. And what I do as a lawyer, when people aren't consistent, that's a problem. And that became a problem for me, his inconsistent stories. And then as you delve deeper into the book, you learn that the Book of Mormon was depicted to me that the plates that Joseph Smith, the golden plates that he got that were buried in the Hill Cumorah that he pulled out and translated, he wasn't looking at the plates when he translated them. He had a rock, an opaque rock that was just a round, smooth rock that he would put in a top hat. He'd put his head in there, and then he would just dictate to a scribe what the Book of Mormon was being translated as, even though that he wasn't actually looking at the plates and translating the characters with the gift of God. And that, you may say there's no different. You could have put the rock over the top of the plates and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, like, it was just not told to me. And I wasn't the only one. Like, I'll put the paintings up of what was depicted. Now, people can say, no, they said it. Nah. You had to go looking to go find out the peepstone. Reality was everybody thought he was running his finger over the plates, translating. And it was such a sacred process that the scribe was on the other side of a curtain and couldn't even see the plates. So that bothered me. And then you learn of Joseph using this stone to do treasure digging. And then you learn that Joseph takes his small believer group to Kirtland, Ohio, and starts a bank. And the bank fails spectacularly and costs a lot of believers almost all their money. But Joseph seemed to always come out on top. And then you learn that Joseph's right-hand man, the guy who wrote most of the Book of Mormon for him, like was his scribe, Oliver Cowdery, you learn why he was kicked out of the church. And I learned that he's kicked out of the church because Oliver Cowdery accused Joseph Smith of having an affair with a woman by the name of Fanny Alger, who lived with Emma and Joseph in Kirtland. And people allegedly saw them having relations in the barn. And Oliver Cowdery would not back off his accusation, and that ultimately cost him his membership in the church. He was excommunicated because of that. You learn about that. And then you get going down and you learn about really the polygamy, and it dives deeper into the polygamy. And Bushman, in the book, he says, I'm going to give this information from the perspective of a believer. I'm not going to explain everything, but I'm going to assume that there's a spiritual or good faith explanation for everything, which is fine that he has to do that. But the facts are the facts. Joseph had multiple wives. He had teenage wives. He did not tell his wife about it for a long time. And when she finally threatened to leave him, when she found out, he offered up one of his friends, William Law, as, oh, you can get it too. Go to this guy. And it bothered me that most of the members of the church did not know this was happening. Joseph would deny it publicly. And you start to get a picture of a guy who's like, man, this hero on this side, and then these things he's doing, and it just doesn't look good. Like, it doesn't look to be like he's really of good character. There's no question he was charismatic. There's no question he was able to convince people. He was a leader, and he was able to convince people. People had confidence in him. That's why they call people con men. And it hurts me to this day right now to say these things about the guy, because it's like, I can't believe that the guy that I portrayed, who was really my hero, and who just died for this cause, has all this other side. And it became like, man, if this is how he was, what else is there? And then at the very end, you learn that Joseph Smith, when his story, his secrets were going to be printed in a printing press by William Law, who left the church and started his own printing press in Nauvoo, when he was going to put these things out and continue to tell his side of the story, it was anti-Joseph. Joseph Smith ordered his printing press to be destroyed, and ultimately that's what led to Joseph Smith's imprisonment, that ultimately led to him being shot. So there's a lot more, but those are some examples of the issues that became indelible in my mind. And so at that point, as a 29 to 32 year old, you start going, okay, not all is as it seems. My personal belief system and my history, all these things. Now I'm starting to see all these issues, but But I progressed on. I stayed in the church all this time. I was having callings, elders quorum. I was a gospel doctrine teacher for many years. And I really reveled in learning more and applying the spiritual principles to my life. And so it was fulfilling for me on one hand, but the other hand, I think I started to have this voice in my head that was like, it's not adding up, man. And you know it, and you need to do something about it. But I didn't have the guts. So as I delved more and more into these issues, as I got into my early to mid 30s, I started listening to a podcast called Stay LDS. It's called Stay LDS. And the concept was, we know there's issues out there, but it's better to stay LDS even if you have faith concerns rather than leave. And the host of that was John Dehlin, the infamous John Dehlin, who would later go on to be excommunicated for that podcast and his subsequent podcast, Mormon Stories. But one of the first episodes in Stay LDS is an interview with Richard Bushman, the author of Rough Stone Rolling. And it struck me as I listened to this that despite all this evidence that was not good, Bushman was finding a way to be a believer. And it just basically delved down to his justification for staying in the church. And this is an 80-year-old man who I couldn't expect to change course. His justification was the church makes me a better man. That's what it ultimately came down to. Despite all the issues, the church makes me, I'm a better person because of it. And I'm staying. And so I was able to kind of adopt that and think like, okay, if I have issues, and it wasn't like I didn't believe still, but my belief system and paradigm was changing. I was able to say it makes me a better man. It gives me a purpose. It gives me a structure. At this point, my social circles are completely church-based. My business dealings are church-based, and I just left my own to do my own law firm. So almost all my clients were church-based, or the attorneys that were referring me cases were from the church. And it was difficult. You can't just extricate yourself. My family's in, all their friends are in. They're starting to have their own, they're getting baptized, they're doing their own church stuff. They're getting older now, some of my older kids. And it's just not, you can just say, stop the music, I'm out. It's like trying to leave trying to never talk to a family member. It's everything, my worldview, my relationship. Everything was framed by my belief system. Everything, politics, everything. So you can't just say, oh, well, okay, Joseph Smith you determined he wasn't everything he said he was, so you got to go. Maybe some people are like that. I would have felt like that would have been reckless for me. I was very deliberate. I was not going to give up and risk my salvation in a very rash process. And so I just said, it's going to be okay. I'm still a better man because of it. And kind of kept marching on and on and on because of that. Now, during this time, you may be wondering, well, what kind of a life were you living? I was clean living, brothers. I did not. I mean, I think the worst you could say I ever did was occasionally I would watch pornography. And that was something that the times when I would, it would feel completely guilt-ridden. Couldn't really talk to my wife about it, even though she probably wouldn't have cared. I just didn't feel like that made me a great priesthood holder. And it wasn't something that was prevalent, but there were times when I did, and that felt off. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't go out. Nothing. I wasn't looking to go out and just let loose. That was not in my nature. So yeah, I was in it all the way. I was believing. I would feel guilty. One of the things that during that time period that, and maybe another chink in the armor, was it felt like every time I went to church, I always felt like I was falling short. And that was kind of the message, right? Like, we can never attain perfection. We can never do everything we're supposed to. And Jesus will make up the difference. But that is just a system that makes you reliant upon it. And it made me just perpetually frustrated that I was falling short. I never felt worthy all the way. I never felt like I was everything I should be, the priest. I wasn't like this guy or that guy or this guy. I just felt a lot bit falling short. And looking back on it, that was bad for my mental health. At the time, I just felt like this is just, you got to keep going better. This is just be determined, man. Just keep doing it. So I continue on. But then the church starts doing things, the modern day church starts doing things that were a little weird. Like, they changed this policy on children of homosexuals, whether they could be full membership or be baptized. I don't remember all the details, but the policy was not hopeful to these people. On one hand, they allow any 8-year-old to get baptized without really even having knowledge of what the belief system is. They get to make that choice for themselves. But yet, if your parents are gay, you couldn't, or it was a weird thing. But then there was an uproar, so the policy changed back in a way. So I'm like, wait a minute, they just give in to public opinion. And then there was there were other issues. I mean, they would run a I'm a Mormon campaign. Like I remember Brandon Flowers from The Killers, like saying, "My name is Brandon Flowers, and I'm a Mormon." They did a whole little snippet on him. But then a few years later, God gave revelation that we shouldn't even use the term Mormon anymore to describe believers because that's a worldly descriptor, and we're really just members of the Church of Jesus Christ. And it just seemed like the leadership was not consistent. And then it got, I would say, another major thing was the church decided to try to get in front of all this new information on the internet about the church. I mean, the internet became prevalent, so information became prevalent, and we weren't supposed to go on the internet, only trust church sources. And so they decided to put out the gospel topic essays, which were essays that were to describe what was going on with any issues like Joseph Smith's polygamy or the LDS church's not allowing people of African descent to have full membership privileges until like 1978. The Mountain Meadows Massacre, which is another thing. Actually, that's another thing that bothered me was Mountain Meadows, and you can look into it. But I remember taking my son to go to the site where, Brigham Young had everybody in a fervor and led to this, in my opinion, massacre. The doctrine of blood atonement. These are things you can look up. But my point there is the essays tried to address the issues, but they did it in a way that was disingenuous. The language they would use was sneaky. It was manipulative. It wasn't forthright. For example, instead of saying that Joseph Smith married either a 13 or 14-year-old, I think she was 13, or maybe she was 14, and they don't say that. They say just a few months shy or a few weeks shy of her 15th birthday or 14th birthday. They don't want it. They want to just push it. Like, it was just manipulative. And maybe I was looking for reasons at that point. I started to get a little bit like, okay, this thing is like, I'm not going to be pushed around and manipulated by these people anymore. Like, who they think I'm stupid. And that's the worst thing you can do to someone, is think that you're tricking them and that they're dumb. And when they're not, maybe if they're dumb, they don't know the difference, but I wasn't dumb. And I felt like, okay, I'm being manipulated. They're trying to change the story. They're trying to say those things were in the past, that those were products of their time. Well, God is timeless. God's timeless. If racism is wrong, it's wrong. It doesn't matter when it is. If pedophilia is wrong, it's wrong. And so I was just getting now, okay, I don't know. And I'm paying tens of thousands of dollars in tithing, despite having my own financial troubles. I know I was a lawyer, but my son Max had a blood disorder, and so we had major medical bills. And I'm paying my tithing, and I can't pay everything's on a credit card. It was just bad. And so I'm just at that point going, okay. And then some other things happened with church leaders that I just realized I'm not looking for a reason, but why, in what world would a man allow another man to take his wife and to go to an interview, and then the man says, the leader says, "Hey, husband, wait in the lobby. I'm going to go talk to your wife." He pulls her in there and then starts asking her questions about the husband who's on the other side of the door. Is he a good priesthood holder? Does he do the right things? Because I feel like there's just something about him, and he has, if it's all the boxes, but I feel like we're missing something. Is there anything? Like, what world does that happen? In what world, and this actually happened, in what world is an 11 or 12-year-old girl asked by an adult bishop alone in a room whether she masturbates? That happened to some friends of mine. In what world is that possible? And this girl didn't even know what that word meant. In what world are these things possible? I could just go on and on and on, the examples. It gets worse and worse. And I start thinking, wait a minute, this is so messed up. We're taught not to question anybody, but we let our kids go with these people. Who are they? Like, they're not trained. These bishops aren't trained psychologists. They're not trained therapists. They don't even have theological training. So you start to get, you can see now my body language now, how I am now. I started to get that way. I'm going, oh man, I don't know. I want to kind of take my family, and I want to be the leader of my family, not the church. Me be the leader of the church, be a leader of my family. And I'm like a conduit of that. So that was bothersome. These other things were bothersome. And then my children are getting older and getting closer to mission age, and I see it coming, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what to do. So the time comes for my oldest son, Max, to go on a mission. And he gets his mission call to Paris, France. And I was so conflicted when he opened his call, because he may differ with me. I was forthright with my sons that the mission is not the best 2 years. It absolutely sucks. It's a grind. It's mentally taxing. It's physically taxing. You don't have to go. I didn't say to them, I don't think this religion is what it says it is. I did tell them about issues. I did tell them to read Rough Stone Rolling. I did not want to sit down with them and specifically point out the issues and beat them over the head with the things that I had discovered over years, because I felt like so many people the church works for. And do I want to take that from them, or do I want to allow them to arrive at that on their own? Because then if they arrive on their own, it's their own conviction. It's not me telling them. So it's very difficult for me. And in some ways I'm public, in some ways I'm very private, and can be a good communicator. Sometimes I'm not. So he opens the call and he goes on the mission. And I was still at that point of the opinion that it's going to be a net benefit for him to go. If you would give me the choice, the personal choice, whether he would go or not, I would say go. In my mind, I convinced myself that he could learn a language, a culture. He could learn discipline, mental strength. He could learn a language. He could learn to be an ambassador of good in the world through his own way, even if, he wasn't fully engaged in the conversion process, because I didn't think he's convert anybody anyway in France. So I was like, okay, well, he can just go over there and learn the culture and, learn to be tough. And, I cried for 2 days when I dropped him off on the mission. I cried. The first day I cried because it was my oldest son leaving, and our family unit was not going to be the same anymore, just like any parent dropping their kid off at college or anything else. And the second day I cried because I didn't fully believe in what he was doing, and I didn't trust the church to take care of him. And because of that, I actually paid for him to have his own little Wi-Fi mobile hotspot. And so he would have a tablet and he could text me on Google Hangout. And he was only supposed to do that on his P days, but I wanted him to have access to me if he needed it. And as time went on, I could see it was difficult for him. He was making it. I could see he was trying to put on a brave face and find the good and the bad, despite not having any success there. And if you've been in France, they don't like Americans anyway. So you got to go put up being a missionary with a missionary tag on in there. And having been there now in person, I even realized even more, like that would be a nightmare. In Guatemala, everybody wanted to talk to us for other reason than we're Americans and they like to speak English and they're just friendlier. But in France, they don't want to hear anything from anybody. So, I can see that it wasn't going that great. And it kind of came to a head just over halfway through Max's mission. My father died fairly quickly, 6 weeks process, 6 weeks to diagnosis to death. And he died. My father's body's still in the house. And I think I got to call Max. This is late at night, so it was early morning for him. I got to call Max because I don't want him to see it on Facebook or anything else. I want him to, because they had Facebook. I don't want him to see it or hear from someone else. I got to call him. So I call him in Hangouts, and hello, whisper, hi Max, I'm just calling to tell you, Grandpa just passed away. Okay, Dad, I got to get off. I got to get off my if I'm getting in trouble if he sees me on the phone, my companion. And I'm thinking, what the fuck? He's more worried about getting caught by his companion and losing his tablet so he can't communicate at all than the sadness of his grandpa dying. And at that point, I think something snapped in me at that point. I was like, seriously? And I'm dealing with my own grieving and I'm just thinking, man, I don't know. My father just died and my brother said when he died, it's okay. He's in a better spot now. And I don't have any problems with my brother for saying that, but I remember thinking, I don't know where he is. He might just be dead. It might just be over, And that was the moment where I was like, that was the moment probably. Didn't realize it until I just said it, but that moment distinctly, I remember sitting at the kitchen table in my parents' house, which is ironic, where I was raised part of my life. And that's where I had the moment like, no, this is enough. This is enough. So the problem I had was my son Marshall was leaving to go to Argentina on his mission in like 6 weeks after this. So I go through the burial process. Marshall goes on his mission. I was more forthright with Marshall. He may disagree with me. I was more like, bro, I remember having an argument on the floor of my living room before he went on his mission with somebody who was there, some believer, about how the Old Testament lies about the flood. There's incest. It's not a net good. There's issues with the book of Abraham. Like I went on and on and on. And he's sitting right there. But at the same time, and I told him about the essays, at the same time, I'm not going to say, no, don't go. Because for him to go to Argentina was like, okay, Argentina, Spanish. Now I'm starting to see his perspective, like a mission, like from me. And you can be in Latin America, you can be more loosey-goosey with, at least my perception was, with the rules. Like, and the people are a good vibe. The Latinos are my favorite. Like, there's just a vibe. So I'm like, go learn it, like, be fine. And so he went. And that wasn't as hard to send him as it was to send Max, because it was my second kid. And I just, in my mind, thought that it would be different. But Marshall was smart, and he figured it out, and he wasn't going to play the game, and he wasn't going to baptize little kids. And when he expressed that he wasn't comfortable with all that stuff, he was told he didn't have enough faith, and he gave the choice to go home. And so he did. 15 months into his mission, he said, I'm out. And as it happened, it was just before COVID. Like, he beat the shutdown, the lockdowns by like 2 weeks, or he would have been stuck in Argentina for a while till they got charter flights out of there. And that was it. That was, he came home, COVID hit. There was mobile church, whatever, remote church. I never went back. I never stepped foot back. We never did a homecoming. It was just time, and I think it wasn't a specific moment. Before that, we were going to church, but not all the time. Like, we would go and, a couple more things now I'm thinking about it. One is, the most of the time Max was on his mission, we could only speak to him twice a year. And then we could type through Google Hangouts, like a texting app, on P-Day. And my dad dies, and he can't talk to me because of it. Like 2 months after that, the Lord changed his mind and said, oh, wait, you guys can do video calls, phone calls with your missionaries every week. So the rule just changed. It was just inconsistent, right? And then church goes from, the Lord mandated 3 hours, because remember, to go into the temple, you have to say you attend all your church meetings. So you had to go to 3 hours, attend every meeting to go into the temple. All of a sudden, the Lord changed his mind, and church is only 2 hours. So now you only really need to go to 2 hours. The inconsistencies bothered me. I just didn't understand how, if God is all seeing and all knowing, why the changes, why the inconsistencies, and it wouldn't have been a big deal that they changed it, except for they held you to the old standard and told you that's the way God wanted it so strongly, and you were so bad if you didn't do it. And then they can just change it and be like, oh, it's okay now. You can do that. Like, you only have one wife. Now you can have two. Now you can have three. You can have four. If you're a man. If you're a woman, you can't. But only men can. But it's okay. So I just got to the point where I was like, this isn't working for me. So Max gets engaged. He's set to get married in the temple the end of December 2019. I had a temple recommend still, because I'd been with Marshall through the temple. And about that, Marshall goes through, and I prepared him pretty good. So it's going to be handshakes and outfit changes, like an escape room. And I didn't prepare him for the prayer circle, when everybody gets in the circle and they pray and say, kind of chant together and say the words together. And he freaked him out. He's like, that felt like a sacrifice. Like, that felt like they're around an altar. It felt like it was kind of like, we're going to do a human sacrifice or something. And that really threw him off. And I was like, good boy, I'm glad that you're seeing it for yourself. I didn't even tell you about that one. And another thing is, like, you learn that the Mormon temple ceremony is stolen by Joseph Smith, almost word for word and handshake for handshake, from Masonry. Like, the more I learned about my hero, Joseph Smith, I learned he didn't have one original thought. Like, every single thing was plagiarized from something else. It really was. And I can go point per point with you if you want to. It just, rest assured, that's the way it is. So Max gets married. He's got to go through the temple. And I'm like, I have a recommend. I could have gone. Rochelle didn't, because she's realer than me. And we decided not to go to the ceiling. I just told Max the night before, I go, man, I cannot go in and watch you kneel over an altar, the same altar that Joseph Smith would kneel over with teenage girls, or Brigham Young, or Wilford Woodruff, or Lorenzo Snow. All those guys had teenage brides. All of them, all four, look it up. I can't, that's one reason I can't do it. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. So as a result of that, Max was sealed to his wife over an altar. I wasn't there. Family members who he didn't even care for were there. And so they go into the temple. And so I'm waiting in the waiting room, like a bad boy in the principal's office waiting to get called. And I didn't see my son get sealed. And I don't regret it, other than I had to send him in there alone. I felt awful sending him in there alone. And then having kind of what would be a sacred experience for them, having be a part of that, and I can't be a part of that. That hurt. And people's faces when they saw we didn't go in, that's when like, oh shit, they didn't go in. Oh, I'm sure they just want to sin. They just want to sin. They're looking for any reason out. They just don't want to live it anymore. They want to sin. My adult kids are having a hard time with the fact that if we knew that it wasn't for us, why we didn't tell them or get out earlier. And the only thing I would say to that is, number one, I would never want to cause them damage or harm or resentments. I never had a training in how to escape from a cult with my family. I was just being deliberate. I thought it was a net positive. I loved the people I was around. Most of my friends still to this day I've met from church. They may not go, most of them, but I met them because of it. I couldn't find a reason to just go nuclear and just pull the cord and just be out like some people. I couldn't. Maybe it was pride. I don't know. Maybe I didn't want people to judge, or I don't know. I don't know why I didn't. And maybe I didn't communicate better. I thought that I pride my family on being real in our family. Like nothing's sacred. But apparently I didn't do a good job communicating that, because they have a hard time with that. I don't know. I can't say that I didn't have a specific basis to leave until really my dad died and the thing with Max. So anything before that, I wouldn't have had a reason to pull the eject cord. I was bugged by some things, and I would communicate that to them, but I wouldn't have had a basis to tell them not to do a mission. Other than I just didn't want them to leave because I loved being around them. So that's the short answer. I never discussed or even contemplated saying, hey, our family's out. Our family's out. Since then, I passed through a lot. I mean, many, many times. And I'm 100% sincere when I say this. I wish I could be in the bubble of belief. I wish that I had everything answered for me. I wish I had a paradigm that I know where I went, where I came from, why I'm here, where I'm going, and how I'm going to do it. I wish that I believed that. I wish that I didn't. I wish there weren't these stories about Joseph Smith. I wish these weren't these evidences. I wish it would be so simple, because since then you go through a major trauma and grief, and it's not because you want to sin, quote unquote, because I guess getting married to teenage brides and massacring pilgrims is not a sin. Not pilgrims, pioneers is not a sin, but drinking coffee is. It doesn't. You can see it, like it flares. When I talk about it, the issues flare up, but I don't carry it with me all the time. I definitely went through the stages of grief, anger, resentment. Now I just think of it as a thing in the past, and I honestly can't believe anybody of any intellect could believe it. That's how I feel. And if that offends somebody or offends you, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Here's what I would say to you. If you are a true believer, still in the church, you owe it to the people who have suffered to leave, and who have been ostracized and who feel less than because of it. You owe it to them to at least look into the issues, and you at least need to answer within yourself. Okay, given the evidences that I have, the reasonable response to be in this situation would be to leave the church. You have to give that to the people. If you don't, you're an asshole, because the evidence is strong, and you can choose to believe it, but that's what you have to say is, I'm leaning in. I choose to believe it. I'm giving all inferences in favor of staying in, but I can see how if you didn't, why you would leave. That's completely reasonable given the circumstances.
Many versions of the first edition, seer stones, a trial for treasure seeking, Book of Abraham, goes on and on. All this information flooding into the church through the internet, through scholarship in a variety of ways, was more than some people could take. They had been brought up so steeped in that standard version, they thought that was the gospel. And when it began to be disrupted, they felt like they'd been betrayed. Why haven't we known this before? why has this all been hidden from us? They felt disillusioned, and it rattled quite a number of people right out of the church. So we've paid a price for it, but in my own view, until we establish transparency.
Instead, you feel threatened by it. You feel threatened, and so you want to lash out and make excuses for why people leave. And that's not fair, because I could easier, in an easier way, just as easily or more easy, point the finger at you and say, you're just lying to yourself, staying in. You're scared, and you don't want to confront truths because it's going to threaten your worldview and your paradigm. And this is not me attacking you. It's just saying, I want you to think about that. When people leave, listen to them. Past their anger. Get to the bedrock of it. The bedrock of it is, just like the song says, the wise man didn't build his house on the sand. He built it on the rock. And this ain't the rock. I don't know what the rock is, but that ain't the rock. Okay? So how is life after? It's fucking impossibly hard. You are a canary in a cage who's let go. And you got to figure out, where do I eat? Where do I sleep? What do I do? Who are my friends? Where do I go? What about this thing? What about that? What do I do? It's heart-wrenchingly difficult. It's beautiful. It's free. It's freedom versus captivity, and freedom with all of its difficulties. I've never been higher. I've never been lower since I left the church. Never been worse spots, never been in better spots. Had to learn like a small child how to walk again and think again for myself and get a worldview of myself. And that came with its fair share of mistakes. I tried alcohol, yes. I've been in some crazy spots, yes. Have I done stupid things? Yes. Do I regret it? No. The lessons you learn from them I wouldn't take back anything, really. The lessons are super important. Has there been collateral damage with family members and friends? Absolutely. Has there been difficulties between me and my wife? Absolutely. Difficulties with my kids? Absolutely. Difficulties with my kids' relationships with others? Absolutely. But it's all based at least upon a reality. It's based upon something that's real, not some, I'm sorry, it's a fantasy. It's the Easter Bunny, it's Santa Claus, it's the Lord of the Rings written in book. It's not real. And because of that, I'm willing to take my chances in this big bad world versus this literal bubble that was not real. That was the Truman Show. That's the way I feel about it, guys. And if you want to stay in and you can find the net good for yourself, fine. But just at least give the respect to the people who leave to understand that we're not just going out there to freaking rape and pillage. Like, it's very, very difficult being out. So in closing, I would say I don't blame anybody. I don't have regrets against my parents. Absolutely do not. They were wonderful, and they were just doing what they thought was right. And I still talk to my mom about this, where I wouldn't even suggest for her at this point, if she said, I'm out, I'd say, no, you dedicated your life to this. You got to stay in. But I would say, be understanding of people who leave. Don't listen to your church leaders who say they just want to sin, or, whatever they say. They say all sorts of bullshit because they're threatened. I would just say, look into the issues out of respect for yourself and the people around you, because the church is bleeding members. It's an epidemic. It's bleeding young people. It's bleeding. And they're going to come up with all these reasons why that's happening, other than the actual truth that the doctrinal foundations of the church are rotten. Many of the leaders today are chauvinistic. They're power hungry. They're egotistical. But they wrap that in the cape of being inspired leaders and priesthood holders. And just open your mind to it, at least. That's all I would ask. Open your mind, because one day you're going to realize, like it or not, that you're wrong. And that's just the way I feel about it. I can't back off it. You're wrong. Do I love you? Do I love my people? Do I love my Mormons? Is it part of my heritage? Absolutely. To the point that my wife resigned from the Mormon church. She's no longer on the rolls of the church. I cannot do it. I feel like, and I don't disagree with her for doing it, but my personal reasons for staying on the rolls is, I feel like That's a part of who I am. That's a part of who I am. The person I am, the shape that I am, the moral fiber, the conviction, the Spanish, the mental strength, the experiences, the pioneer heritage, the Joseph Smith, growing up where I grew up. Even that idea of Joseph Smith as my hero in my mind, he's still there. Like, I still respect that. I can't write that off by writing a letter resigning it right now. I can't do it. Now, if someone were to mess with my family again, I probably would. There was a time when I was angry enough to do it, but right now I can't make myself do it. So just know it's better. I'm better now. Because of it, I'm free. It's not roses and sunshine and rainbows and unicorns at all. It's much harder out. But I feel like I'm living a life that's true to me, and it's true to what is more in reality than if not. That's my story. I'm only telling it one time. I'm going to do one follow-up pod if people have questions. That's it. I'm not talking about it publicly again. Thanks for listening if you did listen.